Hello and welcome to this afternoon's episode of Real Talks, where we have candid talks that look to break glass ceilings and challenge social norms in the general profession. So, my name's Martha DeCosta Sherwood, your transformational empowerment coach. Today's session, we are talking about the rhetoric that goes around that you are just too emotional. Why this is absolute BS and should be definitely ignored. Now, this thing around emotions is something that is often used, and particularly something that women hear. So we will hear a lot of the time, women are too emotional. And so I'm going to just start with this is BS, it's nonsense. This is not something that we're going to be accepting, because there is no such thing as anyone being too emotional, because we're all emotional human beings. And so where does this rhetoric come from? So typically, as we've always heard, we've heard this saying, it's a man's world. It's a man's world. And then as a result of that, there are certain characteristics which are traditionally quite masculine and other characteristics that are traditionally quite feminine. And with it being a man's world, typically a lot of the masculine traits and characteristics are ones which are attributed towards leadership and success and things operating around the world. And therefore, when characteristics which are typically feminine are not therefore valued in the same kind of light. And that's often why you'll hear this kind of rhetoric that women in particular are too emotional, or even if a man does demonstrate characteristics which are typically believed to be more feminine, then that is also used as a dig and to say you're too emotional, or maybe you'll be even being too feminine. However, what we would have noticed as time has gone on and things have moved and industries have changed, we've started to see that the whole person is really important. And one of the big things that has been on the rise recently is emotional intelligence. Okay. And so our emotional intelligence is exactly that. It's about your ability to manage your emotions and other people's emotions around you. And we've seen a rise in the importance of this over the last couple of years. And it's a big thing quite now. And it's another reason why we shouldn't just accept this rhetoric that you are too emotional. And then, so what does emotional intelligence entail? So there's 4 key areas to emotional intelligence. And these help you in terms of handling your own emotions, the emotions of others, and so that we can use our emotions more effectively. So the first part of that is, and the beginning, the core of this, and I believe it's the foundation of our emotional intelligence, is self-awareness. Okay, so being self-aware. So recognizing your own emotions, so how you are, your thoughts and your feelings, okay, and recognizing those processes, and then having the ability to identify your triggers, identify what things make you happy, what things make you sad, what things frustrate you, and etc. So that really self-awareness is very important, because with that self-awareness, it enables us to know, identify our emotions, but it also leads on to talk about how we feel about ourselves in terms of our confidence, but also thinking about how we influence other people. I'm a firm believer that, we can't make anybody else do anything. We can't control other people. Our ultimate power and control is with us, but we do have the ability to influence. And if we are self-aware, then we can be more cognizant about how we impact other people. And so, for example, someone like me, I remember from being a kid, even at school, I remember the things my teachers would always say to me is, Martha, you're making the rest of the class misbehave. And, I was always like, what do you mean? No, I'm not. I've done my work. I did what I was supposed to be doing. But then the truth is, I wasn't making anybody do anything, but I did have that personality about me that meant I had the ability to influence the behavior in a classroom. And that's moved on to mean I have the ability to influence behaviors and thoughts and feelings and processes and things like that in the profession, as do we all. So if we have this self-awareness, we can make sure that those influences are positive, because sometimes as well, those influences could be negative. And sometimes you hear that with people saying maybe they think you're intimidating and the rest of it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but we do have to be aware of how we influence other people. So the first part of that emotional intelligence, because these things bring up our feelings, is having our own self-awareness. Now, once we are aware, so we know, how we feel, and we know what makes us happy, we know what makes us sad, we know how we impact other people, the next step to that is about self-management. So this is us regulating those feelings and our emotions. And so that's the case of, it doesn't mean you don't have the feelings. And I always say our feelings are valid. Okay, so they're valid. So that's why I also don't believe there's this thing as being too emotional. Some people feel things more than others. That doesn't take it away from anybody. All of our feelings are valid, but we need to think about how we respond to those feelings. And that's that self-management. So, and typically this is about how we deal with negative emotions. Because often, even if you express a positive emotion and you're quite overt and extra, too much, as people say, that's not going to necessarily have a negative impact on somebody. And people are not necessarily going to also label that in a negative way. So, if you get someone who's super excited and they jump up and down, or they're super affectionate and they're touchy-feely, that's going to have less of an impact than somebody who's on the opposite side of that. And when they're frustrated, annoyed, or angry, they act more aggressive, or they're louder or more confrontational. So we're typically talking about the ability to manage negative feelings, and also how we respond in those scenarios appropriately. So it doesn't mean that the feelings are not there, though. So I think it's important that I say that. This does not mean that you don't feel frustrated, and you know how that feels. And that's why young children, they have temper tantrums, because they don't know how to express those big feelings in an appropriate way. And as adults, that feeling that we had as a child doesn't go away. And I don't think it's any less severe. It's just that we need to know how to put that in an outlet in an appropriate manner. So you become self-aware, and then you know how to manage yourself. But all of these emotions are important. And then once we started with self, then that's when we go fully to the external. And this is a kind of like the social awareness and relationships part. So your social awareness, you would have done this. This is about like your ability to read the room. We've heard this, right? Your ability to read a room. And so, for example, this is really important when you're networking. What's the environment that you're in? How are you getting the vibe from the room in terms of the way people are networking? Your ability to read the room. Or, if you've ever had that time where, yourself and a colleague or somebody might be sat at a desk, and, you might be having quite an intense conversation, and you typically, you're giving off that kind of vibe that this is deep, this is intense, you maybe don't want to be disrupted. And then somebody comes in and disrupts it, maybe with a joke. And under normal circumstances, that was okay. But they lacked the ability to read what was happening and what was going on. And this is important, because that ability to read and see things, there's a level of, it's about empathy, right? And that is one of the biggest strengths that women hold, and one of the biggest strengths in terms of leadership that's been identified. So that ability to read something and empathize with somebody else is a powerful thing. But in order to do that, you need to have awareness. Okay, so you need to be aware of other people's thoughts and feelings and the environment around you. Okay, and then thinking about what are the emotions and feelings that are invoked in that. And then with that, having the ability to do that, right? So having the ability to kind of note and say, oh, you're really happy today, and keep that happiness and say, what we celebrated, or or the note to see that someone's not quite all right, and you just check in on them. How are you? Are you okay? Or even just to know, to give them the space. Yeah. And then with your ability to have that, this is about relationships. Relationships, the foundations of relationships are emotions. Okay. They're built on an emotion. They're built on our ability to get on and care for one another, and how we do that, right? And so we can't have effective relationships if those emotions are always intense or conflict, okay, or at one another. Or even if those emotions invoke frustration because we don't feel that people understand us. Yeah. And that's a big thing, isn't it? Sometimes. Or how do we build those relationships if we don't feel valued with them? That's one of the biggest things, is about a relationship in that social development is about belonging and feeling a part of something. And so in order to do that, you need to be aware of the emotions, your own emotions, and how you're projecting what you want from a relationship, but also your ability to read somebody else's in that whole higher relationship. And that makes up the whole part of emotional intelligence. And when we have that emotional intelligence, it enables us to excel. So there's no such thing as us being too emotional. In fact, we should tap into these emotions. It's what we do with our emotions that matter, not about us not having them, which is often kind of what is alluded to in this idea about, oh, just stop being emotional, you're too emotional. No. It's very important. It makes a very big difference. And so let's not get caught up in that. And so let's break this down a bit more as well. So having emotional intelligence has been proven. Okay, has been proven. It's like it's a alternative viewpoint and perspective on how we do things. And having this has been proven to improve business success rates and outcomes, okay, and effectiveness of people working together in teams, and all of the rest of those processes. And as I alluded to earlier, one of the number one strengths of female leaders who tend to be more in touch with their emotions and use emotional intelligence in their leadership, okay, is that empathy. And the benefit of that is that you're able to build, like I said, these relationships and teams, which means people want to work with you, people want to work for you, people show up, people put out. Okay. And so when problems arise, because often that's what it is, when problems arise, because of this relationship that they have developed, because they feel heard, they feel understood, they're likely to go above and beyond and push through and continue and problem solve because of the empathy and the emotional intelligence that's been demonstrated by a leader. So it's important. It really is, because we are human. We are not robots. So it's not going to be beneficial for us to act as though we're going to be in any capacity and in any industry have the ability to function and switch off our emotions. No, we need to be all rounded. So logic is important, definitely. Okay, we need the logic. You need to be making sure we're sensible. When I say this, particularly with our emotions, because you might have a feeling, and the judgment that you take from that feeling doesn't necessarily mean that's factually correct, right? So we'll have to put some logic in there to make sure we draw an appropriate conclusion and take appropriate action. But that doesn't mean that your feeling is invalid, and it also doesn't mean that we shouldn't feel these things. So knowing that, having that as a piece of insight and information that's really important. Please let's just go back to this idea. Whenever you feel that there's an emotion coming in and you want to shut that down, don't shut it down. Because emotions tell us things. We're taking in information, and that's where this feeling comes from. It's telling us something, right? And on the one end of it, it's what we live for. Okay, we have a purpose, right? We're searching for love and happiness. Those are parts of our emotions. Okay, so it's on the one end, that's our driving force, but on the other end of that, there are emotions which are there to protect us or to let us know things are wrong. I'm frightened, I'm fearful, I'm frustrated. Frustration is one of the key ones that lets us know there's a disconnect somewhere. There needs to be something changing. Not you just say, "I don't feel like that." There's a disconnect somewhere and we need to connect it. So don't run away from those emotions, no matter what. And let's start to drop the negative connotations that come with us being emotional. So if you have these feelings, don't shut them down. And if you get to a point where you see somebody expressing an emotion and you're inside and you're thinking to say, "Oh gosh, that person's too emotional," just stop for a moment and collect yourself. Because often, yeah, that is a reflection of you. Somebody else having an emotion and expressing that and you feeling uncomfortable with that is often a reflection on you rather than the person. So you might need to think about what's the reason that you feel uncomfortable with these emotional expressions, and think about that. Because you see, if you actually tap into your emotions and you go through and you have emotional intelligence, then that's going to actually enable you to be more effective, because everything that you go through in life is going to invoke some form of feelings. And if you don't know how those things trigger you, then you're going to be reactive. And that's never a good thing. You're going to be reactive. And if you don't know, you're not going to be able to learn to manage them. Okay? And if you can't notice emotions, you're not going to be able to discern that from other people. Even if many of us are working from home now, we still have interactions with people. And relationship building is a very, very big, important part of what most of us do. And in order to build relationship, trust is a big thing in that. And that is built on feelings and emotions. There's evidence behind that, right? Yep, they've been consistent. They've showed up. But there's a lot of other underlying things under them. And it's going to be very important. So the rhetoric that you're just too emotional is absolute BS and should definitely be ignored. 100% ignored. Rather than thinking that anybody's too emotional, okay? Rather than thinking that anyone is too emotional, embrace those emotions. And if we do happen to be expressing those emotions inappropriately, then it's about learning emotional intelligence rather than dismissing our emotions at all. So thank you very much. I do hope you found that useful, and I look forward to talking to you next week.